everyone, it's Tori, and today I'm going to share with you a very beginner-friendly and usable sewing project that you can complete in less than an hour. What I'm going to show you today is how to make a soup bowl cozy that looks similar to this. So I made a pattern for soup bowl cozy and an ice cream cozy that looks like this to protect your hands from the cold, and then of course the soup bowl cozy to protect your hands when you microwave your soup or whatever hot meal you have. In my case it's usually like stew, but I released this pattern a couple of years, actually 2.5 years ago, and I've sold over 200 patterns with almost a 5-star rating over on Etsy. And I realized it's been a long time since I revisited this topic, and when I was looking at my videos, I don't have a video on how to make the soup portion. So I have an existing video I'll link below on how to create the ice cream portion. But as we're getting into those as we're getting into those colder months, this is going to be way more useful. And this also came up. I'm going to visit my dad in a few days, and he, mentioned in passing, what would be nice to have at the cabin? A couple of those bowl cozies. So of course I thought this is a perfect opportunity to get some of these made and share with all of you how to do that as well. Now I am updating the pattern. You do not need the pattern, so I want to be upfront with this. The pattern is helpful. I'm a pattern person. I like to read directions. It just kind of helps me so I can mark them off as I go. But what I'm going to show you in this video does not require the pattern. But if you want to support me and the channel, I'll link the pattern below. I'm updating it because I'm also including, I just did some testing today and I made a new size. So I have had, I don't even know, more than 20 people ask me about making cozies for the Ninja Creami Pint cozy, or Ninja Creami Pints. I don't have a Ninja Creami ice cream maker, so it was a challenge for me and I had to figure out how I'm going to do it. So I did, and today I made a prototype and it does fit. So I'm actually including the instructions for this in this new updated pattern for 2024. But today we are going to focus on this version right here, the bowl cozy. The great news with these patterns, all three of these patterns right here were made with 10-inch square fabric. That's pretty much it. 10-inch square fabric, and if you can sew a straight line, you're going to be able to make these. So let's stop talking and let's get in to how to make the soup bowl cozy. So let's start with our supplies. So first and foremost, if you have the pattern, you'll want to print that out and have that available. The thing that the pattern does have, just to make it easier, is just some guidelines for and my printer, by the way, is almost out of ink. That's why it looks awful. But it does have some guidelines for doing the pleats. So it has some pleat guides on here that you can use. And one of the things that I like to do when I make my patterns is to actually reuse some old cardboard and create reusable templates so that I can use them over and over. Now, if you do not have the pattern, again, you're just going to cut out a 10-inch square, or you're going to cut out 10-inch square fabric. So again, you don't have to go through the whole process of cutting out cardboard or anything like that if you're just using your fabric, but you can use this if you're going to make quite a few. And in fact, some of the reviews that I've had, people have made them for different trade shows or craft shows or whatever, and they are always a popular seller for them. So if you're going to make more, and the holidays are coming up, right? So just make yourself a pattern, 10-inch square, and that way you'll be able to make a number of them. And then also when it comes to the pleat guides, so in the pattern, you'll have the little pleat guides available, but I'm also going to give you those measurements when we get there for the soup bowl cozy in particular. Now, when it comes to your fabric, so you will need 100% cotton fabric as well as 100% cotton batting. You can find this at most craft stores. This one I got at a secondhand store, but it is 100% cotton. Where does it say? Craft sewing, cotton, and batting. But then I have an open container that I'm actually using, but I just wanted to show you. Definitely need to make sure cotton. You know what else needs to be cotton? Your thread. We don't often think about the thread that we're using if you have kind of thread that you really enjoy working with, but for this particular project, cotton. And So let me tell you the reason why, because I'm a why person. So for these particular bowl cozies, the way that we use them in my household is for second day stew. We'll put our bowls in the cozy, we'll pop it in the microwave, and then when we pull it out, we don't burn our hands, and then we can just eat it like this. Now, I have seen so many people talking online about how it can be dangerous to put things in the microwave. Well, I'm gonna tell you, it's always dangerous to put things in the microwave. But if you're ensuring that your fabric is 100% cotton, your batting is 100% cotton, and your thread is 100% cotton, then you should be okay. But again, always take precautions as necessary, and you don't have to use this in the microwave. You can simply just use this when you pull it out as a place to put it so that you don't burn your hands, okay? So cotton, all cotton. So now you also will need, I always recommend having an iron. I have used this for years. This is just my Cricut Easy Press Mini. That way you can keep your fabric flat, especially when you're working with cotton. You want nice crisp fabric so that the corners work well. But if you don't have an iron, or you don't have one close by, I think for this project it'll be okay, because we're not actually going to be pressing seams or anything like that. So this is more of a prep stage piece, but I do recommend it. You'll also, of course, need your scissors. You'll need a ruler to cut the pleats, and you'll need a marking tool of some kind. I really like using chalk. Some people like using marking pins, whatever works best for you, but I find these to work really well. It's easy to remove if I need to. And yeah, so I would recommend having that, because we are going to create some X's on our fabric with sewing, and we definitely want to have guidelines. Not everyone needs a guideline, but I'll tell you, when I don't use it, I can absolutely tell that it's not as perfect as I want. But you'll need to have pins, because you'll want to pin it so it doesn't shift around. And then I also recommend having some clips, because once you sew the layers together and we do the top stitching, these are going to help keep it in place. And you know, these work a lot better than the pins when it's that thick. Also, one other thing to keep in mind that you could use for this pattern is some additional, what do you call these? Straps. Okay, a little fabric loop, a little fabric loop here if you want to have an easy way to organize it. You can use one of these. If you have, maybe you have brand ribbon or brand things like this, you can use it if it's 100% cotton. But these, I'll tell you, these are polyester. Pretty sure these are nylon or polyester. So these I cannot use on the soup bowl, but I certainly could use it on like the ice cream version or the Ninja Creami version, because they're not going to go in the microwave. So just keep that in mind. Rotary cutters, I do a lot of crafting, and having a rotary mat and a rotary cutter is the best thing that I have ever invested in years and years ago. So I also recommend that. That'll make your prep piece of it a lot faster. And then the last thing that I would say that's a recommend is a point turner. Now, if you don't have one of these little point turner tools, you can use something else. I've heard people say chopsticks. I would say try to stay away from a chopstick. Those have a really pointed end, and they can go right through the fabric. But if you have some that maybe are a little bit duller, that could work. Also, crochet hooks. I use this Tunisian crochet hook pretty often because it does have a nice rounded edge, and this way you'll get those nice pointed corners. So those are all of our supplies. Now let's talk about prep. So for this project, and this project, y'all, is this, you can make this in an hour. And then if you're doing more than one at a time, you can probably get out a few in an hour, because it goes pretty quickly. So you will need for this project 2 10-inch squares of cotton fabric, and then we'll also need 2 10-inch squares of cotton batting. For the batting itself, I do recommend cutting it a little bit smaller than the 10 inches. I always start with 10 inches, and then as I align it, I just kind of cut away the edges. It does make it a lot easier when you have multiple layers together. So you can see it's not perfect. It doesn't have to be. It's going to be on the inside. The reason we want to have it smaller than the actual fabric piece is because, again, multiple layers make things a little bit harder to do. So, oh, and then also the if you wanted to use a loop, if you wanted to add a cotton loop. You can make these whatever size you want. This one right here, I think, is like 2 by 4, but whatever you're most comfortable with. Again, if it's cotton and you have it already made, maybe you have some ribbon, use that. But with this one, you could fold it in half like this and then stitch it up, and then you have your loop. So this is what we're going to be using. Once you have all of your pieces cut, now we're going to start by applying, or not applying, but we're going to start by placing that batting on the wrong side. So you're going to place one thing of batting on the wrong side. As I mentioned before, having pins is going to be very helpful. So I'm just going to add a few pins. What I do want to let you know is we are going to be stitching from corner to corner, corner to corner. So we're going to be making an X. So when you put your pins in, just be mindful of that. That way you don't have to worry about accidentally running over them and hurting your machine. So I'm just going to put a few in here so that the batting does not move around. I also stitch on the wrong side. I know some folks like to flip it over, but what I find when I stitch the batting to the fabric here, if I have the batting on the bottom, it gets stuck on the feed dogs and it stretches. And so for me, I prefer doing it this way. Also, we're going to mark this with those lines, optional, but if you're going to mark it yourself, it's easier to have those on the inside so you don't have to worry about cleaning them off. Now, before we'll do the same thing to the other piece, we're going to repeat this whole process. So now we're going to take our ruler. I find this one too short. So I have this one, it's a really long ruler right here, and we are going to line it up with this corner, and we're going to line it up with this corner. Okay, just like that. And then we're going to take our marking tool and we're going to create our first stitch line. Then we're going to do the same thing once again, create that stitch line. And we're going to stitch from here to here, here to here, and that's going to give our triangle shape. It's going to give it a nice quilting effect, and it'll also help keep the batting connected to the fabric. So we're going to repeat this on the next piece of fabric. Now, as far as settings on your machine go, you don't have to have anything fancy. I'm using about a 3 length, so a 3 on my length dial, and then on my width dial, I'm doing about 2.5. Now, one other tip I will tell you, because this batting that I'm using does tend to stretch and move around a bit, when I'm sewing, I am giving just a little bit of pressure on the sides just to make sure it doesn't bunch up. I don't want that to happen. So that's just a little tip that might be helpful to you. So the main difference with each of the patterns, whether you're doing the hot cozy, the cold cozy, or the Ninja Creami cozy, the only difference is the size of the pleats. That is it. All of them are made with 10-inch pieces of fabric. Now, for the cold version, you can omit the second layer of batting. Because it's cold, it's not going to be, it doesn't go through as quickly. It's not a big deal. Really, it depends on your own personal preference. But for the hot cozies, you absolutely want to make sure that you have 2 layers of batting, because that is heat and it does, you want it to get absorbed and not on your hands. So for our pleats, so again, I'll just show you my little reduce, reuse, refashion, right? Use all your things as much as you can. So for the cold version, so the cold girl version, if you do make this, I'll show you, that pleat is going to be 2.25 by 2 3/4. Okay, so that's going to be the pleat size for that. And again, that is all included in the pattern. For the Creami size, this pleat, or these pleats, are going to be 2.25 by 2.25. And for what we're doing together, it's the tiniest of them all. This one's going to be 1 inch by 2 inch. So you're just going to have a 1 by 2 pleat. Again, this is why I was telling you, if you don't want to get the pattern, you don't need it, because if you can just measure out 1 inch on the side and 2 on the fabric portion of it, then you're going to be covered. All right, so now that we've talked about the size of the pleats, let's show you how we're going to do it. So you're going to take your fabric piece and fold it in half with your right sides together. And then just make sure, sometimes because when you have batting, it can bunch up on the inside, like you'll see if I can show you an example here. It just starts to bunch up in here. So you do want to make sure you're kind of putting your finger in here, flattening it all out. Okay. And then this is where I am going to use some more pins just to make sure it doesn't try to creep back in. I don't want to have any unexpected pleating on the fabric. So now for your pleats, again, as I just mentioned, we're going to be doing 1 by 2. So you could come up here and you could say, here's 1, and then come down here, there's 2. And then just take your ruler right here, take it right there, and then just measure it right off. Use your marking tool and then mark that pleat. Or if you have the pattern and you want to use your pleat guides, you could just place the pleat guides and make sure that the long side is on the fabric. And then now you can actually do that. So it really is just personal preference. And again, a reason why you do not need to have the pattern there. Okay, so we're going to mark this one. Perfect. And then we're going to come down here and do the exact same thing. Okay, so now we have those 2 marked. We're going to be doing 4 pleats on each piece, but we're going to start with 2. And I'll show you why in just a second. Now, if you're unsure if you made these the right size, I mean, you can always pull them over and double check your measurements, because we do need these to be identical. And one of the things that sometimes can happen is it shifts when you change side to side. So in this case, I just want to make sure that it does go the exact same size. So now that we have done those 2, again, we'll just take these pleats out, or take those out. I do recommend just double checking because you're going to be cutting. So it's always a good idea just to double check. So like for me, I feel like I might have gone a little too low on this one. So I'm just going to go back and do another stitch right over that, but I'll check the rest of them as well. It never hurts to double check your work at all. And we do want these to be pretty identical. All right, now before we do the other pleats, we are going to cut off our excess fabric. So this is why, again, you just want to make sure that everything is lined up correctly, because we're cutting this off. And again, we're just reducing bulk here. All right, so now it kind of looks like a little pair of a little diaper or something. So now what we're going to do is we are going to do the other pleats. So this is how you're going to do this. Okay, we have it flat. You're going to pull the front and the back out and turn it to the right. And then we're going to line these up once again. We just want to make sure everything is perfectly aligned. You can use pins if you want. It's starting to get thick, a little bit thick here. So to do the secondary pleats, again, we're just going to flatten down, making sure this is perfectly flat here. And we're going to do the exact same measurements. So as I mentioned, if you're doing like the Ninja Creami size or the Ice Cream Cozy, this is where you would just, on these pleats here, you would just make all 4 of these pleats the same size. Now, one thing I will tell you, working with batting and with chalk, my sewing machine will certainly need a cleaning after this. So if you want to see a video on how to clean your sewing machine, just let me know. I'll do an updated version. Now we're going to trim again. So now we should have the beginning of our bowl cozy. So you can see it's starting to come together. Okay, just like this. So the next step, now that we have our 2 little pieces right here done, is we're going to take one piece and we're going to put it right side out. So you're just going to make sure you push those pleats out with your finger, just like this, because we want right sides together. That's important. So we're gonna place this in the center, and then we wanna line these up perfectly. So this is one little tip to help you as you sew through this and prevent that bulk. Since we're not pressing these seams open, I do recommend making sure that each of your seams are going a separate direction. So this one is going to the right, and then this one down here right below it, we're gonna make that one go to the left, but we are gonna line them up, okay? And this is where I find clips handy, again, because it can get a little bulky with the batting in here. So let's make sure that the corners are the most important thing. If you have those aligned, we can kind of make sure that the middles are good. So now we have everything pinned in place, but this is how we're going to sew this. So you do need to make sure you leave an opening so that you can turn it right side out. We're going to finish with top stitching, and we are actually going to add a loop to this one. I've decided, I didn't do it on the first one, but I will do it on the second one. So I'll show you how to do that as we get to the final steps of this. But what you want to do is decide what works best for you when it comes to locating the area that you want to leave open. So for me, and this is just because of how many times I've done this, I tend to leave this little pocket over here open and then finish it later. So I start in the top corner all the way, and then that will help us turn it under when we are ready to do the top stitching to finish this little section. So to make sure that I don't accidentally stitch this area, I do put an extra clip here. So this is going to be my area that I don't stitch. And the reason this will remind me is because once, as I'm sewing and I get down to this corner, I'm going to realize that I'm going to have to move this if I want to go further. So this is just my reminder. So we're going to start here, and I tend to use I use a pretty small seam allowance. I tend to use like a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I just find it works really well for me, and then I don't have to trim around the edges. But you can play around with that seam allowance, whatever you typically use. All right, so let's go ahead and stitch this all the way around. And again, we will backspace once we get to here, and then we'll come back together and turn it right side out. And I'll show you how to make the loop. All right, and then now let's turn our piece right side out, wherever that side is. We know it exists. All right, and you can take your finger in here and just kind of poke everything out. Like I mentioned, if you have a point turner, this is a good time to use that. If you have any random threads, we'll get rid of those. All right, so let's go back through. Again, we're going to go gentle because I don't want to go through here. Okay, now we're going to just kind of push out our pleats a little bit. Okay, so we can get a feel for how this is going to look. They are reversible, so you can decide which side you want on the inside and which side you want on the outside. What I do find, though, I don't usually use them as reversible. They stretch out a little bit, so I tend to keep them like this. I like the outside to have the design, but again, it's all personal preference here. So now that we've done that, we are going to need to do a top stitch to finish, and we're going to add our little loop. So to make the loop, again, use whatever method works best for you. There's many ways that you can make this loop. You could just press in the ends a little bit like this and then fold it over if you want a bigger loop. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just fold it in half. Make sure my iron is still on. Yep, fold it in half just like that. Give it a press. And then I'm going to fold this side to the center and, ooh, a little warm. And then just fold them both together. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to stitch really close to the edge on this side, and then I'm gonna turn it and stitch on the edge just to do some top stitching, just so that it looks pretty nice, and then it also looks finished. Once we do that, I'm gonna show you how to attach this to the finishing of our cozy. So here's our little loop. So we are going to, over here on our edge, we're going to just take our fingers, and we want to start with the corner. So we want to get that corner in there. And then we're going to mark these.
so we can finish it. Now, before you pin this side right here, we do want to put in our loop. So what I'm going to do is I like to do it this way so that the little, what do you call it? So that the finished edges are facing out. But again, it's really up to you. If you have a lot of layers here, you may not want to layer them on top, so you can just lay them flat like this. So I think that's what actually I'm going to do for this one. All right, so now that we have our little loop on there, the last step is I'm going to start up in this corner here. Actually, I'm going to start here. So I find it easier instead of starting in the corner because that bulk tends to get stuck under the presser foot. So I tend to start over here. In fact, I think you can see it on this one, where I've back stitched here. So I'll start here, I'll go up, and then I'll go down and around, and you can see that's what the top stitching is gonna look like. So you wanna get it close to the edge as possible with all the layers that are involved. So I'm gonna go ahead and stitch all that around and come back together and show you the finish cozy.
Here is our finished cozy that we made together, the Hot Girl cozy. It worked up so fast. It's such an easy project. It fits most standard size bowls, but you can always make it a little bit bigger. You can play around with that. You can add the loop optionally. You can leave the loop off like this one here. Just by adjusting the pleat sizes, you can make the Cold Girl cozy for your ice cream. Or for those of you asking, as I mentioned earlier, I did just create the Ninja Creami version for those of you that are making your own ice cream at home. So that is it, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. Hopefully you like this content, and until next time, see ya!